Welcome to the latest episode of Fisher German Talks. I'm delighted to be hosting this podcast today, which we are recording on the back of the publishing of our three-part Futureproofing London Thought Leadership Report. Today we're focusing on the Green City. I'm very lucky to be joined by three guests today who are experts in their field, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Rachel, could I start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm Rachel Bridge, Fisher German's ESG partner. I've been with the firm for 19 years and worked across the commercial, infrastructure and property space.
Thanks, Rachel. Will?
Hi, I'm Will Poole. I'm a partner with Howells. We're architects and urban designers working across buildings and more generally places and urban regeneration in London and across the UK.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Hulbert, Head of Programme Management at the Better Buildings Partnership. The Better Buildings Partnership is a collaboration of leading property owners, and we represent over 360 billion of assets under management.
Well, it seems appropriate that we should start talking about buildings, and I guess designing from scratch means that sustainability will always be maximised. But there was a really interesting statistic in the report, in the Green City report, that said that 80% of the buildings in the UK that will be in use in 2050 are already built. And I find that fascinating, but it means that we've got to talk about retrofitting. Will, I wonder if you'd kick us off and just sort of talk about some of the challenges and of course the benefits of that.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that statistic in the report, and 80% sounds like a big number. But I think also if you think about looking out the window where we are here in central London, that 1 in 5 of those buildings won't be here in 20, 30 years, that's pretty surprising too. And in some ways, I think 95% might be, potentially the reality as well. It's inevitable that not every existing building is going to lend itself well to retrofit, and I think that's where we're learning a lot of lessons. Every project that's undertaken, local authorities, government policies are all tuning themselves to the reality of dealing with existing buildings, and obviously remaining ambitious, but accepting that it's not always the right course. That said, I think up to 60% of the embodied carbon in a new build is the structure. So it's a massive head start if we can adapt existing buildings to new uses. I guess the other aspect to that is being in architecture, working across different sectors. It's generally far more challenging to change the use in a retrofit, particularly if you're talking about changing fairly recent commercial large floor plates or retail buildings into residential projects. So there are lots of challenges inherent in it, but I think the fundamental upgrading of buildings to meet new demands of tenants, to meet better environmental standards, is 100% the way to go, and it's certainly our default with every project that we come up with is to first explore the potential for keeping what's there and start by building less, which, as we know, is a first principle of sustainability.
Yeah. And Jonathan, presumably at Better Buildings Partnership, the challenges that Will refers to are things that you scratch your heads about all the time.
Yes, and I guess BBP members would always be looking at a retrofit first from a perspective of reducing embodied carbon. So this opportunity to take an existing building. In London, as walking here today, I mean, of course, one hand you're putting your head up and looking at these amazing new skyscrapers, but we're also walking around a lot of heritage buildings as well. And there's a great, opportunity in terms of those buildings to maintain that real architectural heritage that we find in London. But behind that facade, also use the opportunity of the retrofit to really improve that building so that it's sustainable, but it's also an efficient building that is really working well for those occupiers. Where we are today, and a lot of people who are in office buildings. So, by retrofitting and upgrading the plant and things, you're actually creating a better building for people to work in, better air quality, leading to better productivity. So it's got great benefits from an environmental perspective, but it's also got a great benefits from a tenant perspective as well.
And do you think, Jonathan, that architectural heritage that you refer to, which is fantastic, not just here in London, but in other cities across the UK, I mean, I'm not being a skeptic, but to meet the sort of ambitious goals that we're all aspiring to, do you think we can truly protect that heritage and reach the finish line?
It's a really, really good question. And it's also one that BBP members are wrestling with all of the time. So we have 55 members, and some of them are private property companies in London where they've got rich architectural heritage in terms of their buildings. So there are great opportunities to look at this. But I mean, I think one of the things we do is we have a real estate environmental benchmark at the BBP, which is looking at the performance and use of buildings. And actually, some of these heritage buildings don't actually have as dense or mechanical and electrical on site. Some of them are also very well insulated by actually what is either side of them as well. So there's often this misconception that a heritage building will not be as efficient as newer buildings. And it also comes down to the way that it's operated as well.
And that sort of leads me on to thinking about measurement and really, and I'm looking to Rachel here, who'll know all things like MEES and EPCs and those things. But that are we truly measuring performance correctly? Should we be looking at other ways?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think we're all waiting for the government to come back on the EPC consultation at the minute, and we'll find out more when that comes out. But I think there's lots of different ways of measuring performance, and it really fundamentally depends on what clients, asset owners, and occupiers value from that building. And I think if you begin with that in mind, then you're always going to add value back into the asset that you've got. So what's really important to occupiers is space and quality of building, as we've talked about, but also that collaboration, the placemaking, the impact on the local economy, environment. Then you've got the environmental measurements as well, and how efficient is the building, and how does that work, and how is it managed, and how can you manage it in a way that optimizes that performance. And that is where we have to collaborate. And I think that's what's great about the BBP is you get that collaboration across asset owners, landowners, property owners and tenants and on the occupier space. So by working together with the professional organisations like we have here today, that's what really will make a difference. And
Jonathan, to put you on the spot again, when we were talking earlier, you were talking about theoretical ratings and the adoption of a system or a process that had been dreamt up in Australia. Do you want to just elaborate on that?
It's been incredibly successful in Australia. The neighbours rating system, basically it's a star rating, and in Australia they've had sort of about 30 years experience of it, where they've shown that the higher performing neighbours buildings, they get a higher rent, they have less voids, and they really sort of drive investment from a perspective of being shown to be really good at driving performance of buildings. So when we look at an energy performance certificate, an EPC in the UK, that is looking at the theoretical performance of a building. And there's certainly a place for that, and that often drives investment in retrofit and upgrade, fitting with the investors' long-term ambitions for those buildings. But what it can't do is measure the actual in-use performance of a building. And so you can have an amazingly efficient building theoretically from an EPC perspective, but actually it may not be performing as well from an energy per metre squared perspective because of the way it's used by the occupier or the way that the managing agent is running that building. So we were looking across, as the BBP, at what was happening globally and different areas of best practice. And we really thought that the Neighbours scheme was something which could create great opportunity for the UK market. So in collaboration, we worked with the industry to bring Neighbours across to Neighbours in the UK, and it's called Neighbours UK. And that now is administered by CIBSE and is a collaboration of a lot of industry partners taking it forward. And there are two parts to Neighbours. There's the design for performance. When you've got a new building, we're really designing it, so making sure that it can achieve a certain star rating. So that really means that those interventions are right early on in the design stage. They're built into it. But what we'll often find is those buildings which are designed really well, the soft landings, and they're bringing them across into operation can sometimes mean that actually the theoretical performance of the building and the actual, they don't quite marry up. And what is really great is that Neighbours is really clear in star rating 1 to 6. People can specify what they're wanting from that building, and then it gets clearly measured by kilowatt hours into how that's doing. It's an annual looking at the performance of that building. And what we're finding increasingly is that tenants in the UK, when they're looking for really sustainable buildings which meet their corporate objectives, Neighbours is a really transparent way to sort of say, actually we're wanting a building which performs in this way. But it also engages the tenants really, really well, because they've actually got a real important part to play in the actual operational use of the building.
Yeah, that's be fascinating to see how that all works out, Jonathan. You mentioned occupiers there, and I think it's worth us having some discussion about whether there's any tension in this whole discussion about the needs and the aims of occupiers as opposed to owners and investors. You could see that there's potential tension there, albeit that everybody has their own sustainability goals. And we perhaps could talk about green leases and how that has changed dramatically in recent years. And do we think that momentum will be maintained? Does anybody have a view on that, or whether we've gone as far as we can between collaboration of tenants and business and building owners?
Shall I start off with that one? I guess from a BBP perspective, one of the things that we're most well known for is our toolkits, and we listen to our members about things that they're struggling with of issues. And we've got a whole suite of toolkits on our website, really super practical toolkits supporting with owners and occupiers and other industry actors on a range of different topics, one of which is green leasing. And about 2 years ago, we worked with the legal community to update the BBP's green lease toolkit. And so we worked with the legal community to have really good lease clauses, carefully drafted by legal professionals, that supports that relationship between the occupier and the owner. And that toolkit is really great. You can basically lift those lease clauses and put them into your lease agreements. And there are light and dark green clauses depending where you are on that journey and where the appetite is. But I think one thing which is really important is this, and it slightly lies into your question around where are we at, because ultimately a lot of our BBP members are really referring to their occupiers as their customers, and that relationship between the owner and the occupier is so very important. So if you're just imposing clauses on your tenants, that often is going to be seen as sort of a bit of a threat and actually not a partnership approach. And so a big part that the BBP has been playing is actually really trying to explain really about this being mutual opportunity for both parties. The occupier will have their own ESG and sustainability targets more likely, and they may well be seeking out sustainable space. and the owner has to be a BPP member, you have to have a net zero carbon target. So they've got a clock ticking to ensure that they're achieving this. So the real focus that we've had is about really trying to help everybody to understand, how do you contract well, and how do you set that conversation up really, really early on so it's a positive piece of mutual benefit. And the last point, I think, on leases would be just this whole piece about data. If you can't measure it, you can't measure it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And actually making sure that those clauses around data are clearly there, so that access to data is seen as an opportunity to drive the performance of those buildings.
Yeah, I think there's some really important points there. We've been talking about buildings, quite rightly. Rachel, a moment ago, you mentioned placemaking, and so perhaps we could just sort of zoom out and think more about sort of communities and that sort of thing. If I could turn to you, Will, I know that Howells are very involved in urban master planning. It'd be just good to get your take on the whole issue of sustainability in that area of work, and perhaps we can talk about the impact on social value as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of, I guess we're lucky to be involved with some really significant long-term strategic plans in towns and cities, both in sort of London and regionally in the UK. And I think everything you've just been talking about plays directly into that. The fact that it's no longer a case, I guess, after 20 years in architecture, there was always a sense of architects and consultants pushing from below to achieve these ambitious standards and improve the way we design sustainably. And obviously that turned around within the last decade to be very much pulled from the top, and everything you're saying about green leases is further sort of a validation of that. So this idea that it's a multi-party team effort to get the right results, both at the scale of a lease in a building, but also at a sort of urban placemaking scale. So we work in partnership with city councils, with estate owners like Canary Wharf, and obviously I think the best probably built example of these principles can be seen at King's Cross now. You touched on heritage as well, and obviously there are tensions between heritage and sustainability, as we all know. I think King's Cross shows us in particular the value of retaining heritage assets for cultural identity and placemaking benefit. Even if in some cases we see the best solution in terms of achieving energy performance standards is to probably do the opposite and literally wrap the building in new construction to improve its fabric. Obviously you're then completely undoing the heritage and cultural value of that asset. So there's inevitably going to be tensions there, but certainly I think we've gone from a place a decade or so ago where that wouldn't have been under consideration. I think the new build agenda was just the right way for almost every project of that kind. So we shouldn't underestimate the value of retaining heritage assets, because they can add so much to a place, and that comes much more into the social element of the ESG agenda. It's not just a binary thing about reducing carbon at all costs. I think sometimes there have to be these compromises that end up bringing more value to the place, ultimately making them more inhabitable, nicer places to be in, for a more sort of long-term view on sustainable placemaking.
I think it's a great point that you make, and it really well articulates the ESG story. And everybody started with environment a few years ago, and that's sort of come through, and then people are looking at social value and placemaking and the cultural value of spaces, and good governance should manage those two things in a really positive way, so that it's not always one size fits all, and it's not always one side wins. It's about looking at the merits of the two together. And I think that's where the ESG story has got plenty of growth still to go, because we can really focus on that governance to make sure that the right decisions are made.
Our discussion clearly has a London focus today, Will, and I was fascinated by the case study I was looking at of the work that Howells are doing over at Canary Wharf. It seems to knit into quite a lot of the subjects that we're just talking about. Do you want to give us a flavour for that?
Sure, yeah. So that's Eden Dock, which is essentially a public realm project right in the heart of Canary Wharf Estate. It's one of a series of projects, actually. It's not the first, but it's one of a series of projects which is part of their I guess, their resurgence. So after a bit of a sort of post-pandemic dip in terms of home working boom and headlines around tenants leaving the estate, that's turned around completely now. And I think that's because it's recognised that for it to succeed into the future, it needs to evolve. And that's about making it a more diverse place with a mix of not just workspace, but more homes, culture, education, and of course the public realm, which we're talking about. So Eden Dock was brought into being as part of a wider vision across the estate for urban greening, increasing biodiversity, offsetting harmful effects of heat and the sort of urban heat island effect, which obviously affects Canary Wharf being very dense, fundamentally sort of hardscape metal and glass buildings. So actually making positive, tangible steps to offset those issues into the future. It's obviously done wonders for biodiversity in terms of insects, bird species, fish in the water. So that's a big win. But I think the first principle of it was really about getting people down closer to the water. It's part of this sense of bringing people in as tourists and visitors or local residents to enjoy this part of their city, this part of Tower Hamlets, which might have felt cut off to many of the people living there before. So rather than being 2 or 3 metres above the waterline with a big sort of masonry barrier between you and the water, you're able now to step down or find a step-free accessible route down to the waterside. You can swim and paddle board in the dock as well. So it's hopefully something that's succeeded across a whole spectrum of sustainability targets and ambitions. And as I say, there's plenty more to come across the estate. I think it's also worth sort of zooming out and thinking about Canary Wharf as a built environment as well. They've got an extremely ambitious retrofit agenda, of course. Some of those have been very well publicised, the HSBC Tower being among those in the last year or so. And for the place to succeed, it has to confront the reality of re-envisioning these buildings and bringing them up to a standard that major international tenants are going to be attracted to, coming back to what Jonathan was talking about. So I think that there's a huge advantage, maybe like King's Cross as well, where all of this is under one governance and they can plan long-term, sequence how buildings are going to be upgraded and when, use knowledge and skills that are evolving over years or even decades to really hone that. And that comes across as well into circularity in construction. So they're able to reuse material from one site to the next. It becomes a far more effective operation being under one sort of management. So yeah, I guess to summarise, it's been a fantastic success in terms of public enjoyment. It's been great to see people going there and visiting since it opened just over a year ago, and now with the footbridge as well, it's increased connectivity across the estate. So I think that's all very much about the human personal experience, and it's fun to use, but it does lead directly back in a way to a sort of indirect return on investment, because you see major international tenants deciding to stay on the estate and not leave, or attracting new major occupiers. So it's been part of a big sort of resurgence for Canary Wharf.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we talk about that commerciality piece. And Rachel, I'm sure one of the questions that you get asked as our ESG partner all the time is, well, what is the return on investment? It's probably an impossible question, but tell us how you answer that.
It's a great question, and it's a really valid point, because we all want to do these fantastic things and create these incredible spaces, but it's got to be sustainable from a financial perspective as well as from an environmental and social perspective. And I think that's something that our clients face on a daily basis. There's a lot on the to-do list, there's a lot of priorities, and I think managing ESG so that it creates that return on investment is really important. But there's more than one way to manage it, and whether that's the social value, the voids, the rental return, the capital return, there's more than one way to measure it. And I think what's really important, especially for asset and property owners that have got multiple sites or whole portfolios, it's about looking at the bigger picture and your objectives as an asset owner, and how you attract the right tenants and occupiers, because that's a really big part of it. Really good quality occupiers create really good spaces which attract more really good occupiers, which eventually helps your rental growth or capital growth. And I think that's the bigger point. It doesn't happen overnight, and sometimes you've got to do a series of things to make it work. But when it does start to work, the sort of consequential benefits start to roll, and then that's when it makes a really good point. And it's great to hear that example, Will, because we need to talk more about that, and that's part of what we're the purpose of this discussion. And I know the BBP are really good at taking those pioneering organisations that are looking at making these sorts of investments and then sharing the lessons learned, sharing the mistakes we make, because if we don't share the mistakes, then somebody else is going to make them, and sharing the good work that's been done and the consequences, positive and challenging, as a result of those. And I think that's where the BBP offers us that great window into each other's portfolios to say, okay, actually, how can this work in practice in this scenario?
And Jonathan, just in terms of how you quantify that, you talked about measurability earlier. Just picking up on Rachel's point, demonstrating that, helping business owners to understand that return on investment. How have you gone about that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and so many different ways. I think in terms of one of the key things about the BBP is about helping our members through knowledge sharing, and then also developing common approaches. So our members are looking at all these issues in their own organisations, but those issues are going to be the same across the whole of the membership and the industry more widely as well. So the BBP is quite well known for its toolkits. Our toolkits are publicly available on the BBP website. They're open access. And what we tend to do is we take a topic, we're member-led, so we listen to our members, and then we co-create those guidances. So they're created by the industry for the industry. So those experts who are have been pioneering some of these challenges, that they help us create these documents. Their documents are often living documents, so they're regularly updated as well as things change. But to maybe give you a couple of examples of some toolkits which are supporting. So from a commercial perspective, the BBP have an acquisitions sustainability toolkit. So that is really, really supporting that acquisition due diligence of all the things that you need to think through when you're acquiring a building from a sustainability due diligence perspective. Those pieces of data that you need to capture and the things that you need to think about. And then when you've got that building, how do you onboard it well? So we have a sustainability handover checklist as part of our managing agent's core provisions document about making sure that when you're taking on that building, you're making sure you're collecting that information. And then in the managing of those buildings, so the bit that I'm most passionate about is about the real role of property management to really create a really efficient and good buildings that work really well for the landlord and the occupier. And we have a managing for performance framework, which is really focused on how do you get every kilowatt hour to work as effectively as possible, but how do you collaborate across all the different actors on a building, your occupiers, your facilities managers, your mechanical and electrical experts, and the role of the property manager in asking really good questions. So this framework sort of highlights the things that the property manager should be thinking about, and also shares some best practice about how to approach the performance in use of those buildings.
And Will, we were talking earlier about other parts of the UK and just focusing on the sort of commerciality side of things. Clearly there must be differences in approach at the design stage that you have to consider when you do schemes like the fantastic Paradise scheme in Birmingham that we know well. But the financials are very different when you look at the property markets of, for example, Canary Wharf and central Birmingham. What implications does that have, coming back to the sort of sustainability design side?
Yes, it's a very good point. As you say, there's probably a lot less variation in the actual cost of construction nationally than there might be in the rental values from one city to the next outside London. So yes, those tensions are different and more complex depending where you're working. I think in the example of Paradise, obviously that was a 10 to 15 year vision to bring that into being, and took really long-term commitment by all parties, the council and obviously the developer in principle, to realise a group of really ambitious buildings, which you could well imagine being in central London and competing with the newest stock that we have here. So it's been a great success. It's attracted some really sort of top tier tenants to occupy those buildings, and the sort of consequences of that more widely are that the place is more connected. It's stitched itself back into the city centre. There's far more active travel. There's clean sort of transport options. There's walkable workplaces for people living in and around the city. So I think we're starting now to see measurement of actually the health benefits and the savings on the NHS from those directly as a result of that really positive and ambitious approach to urban sort of regeneration.
Yeah, interesting. And Jonathan, you spend a lot of your time looking at pioneering projects across the UK of both new buildings and retrofitted. Are you seeing any polarisation of the market? I mean, clearly we're sat here in London, and we're seeing some of the best examples within a few miles of here. But are you seeing any polarisation just because of the economic constraints that other cities might face?
It's a really good question. I think one of the things that the BBP offers to its members is a site visit programme. So our members are lucky enough to go round and be showcased some of our members' buildings. And those are really honest conversations. So they're not just all about the great features that they have on those buildings, but it's also about some of the challenges along the way. There's also some of the good news stories. So, for example, last week we were in a building which they'd had to make some really difficult decisions, commercial decisions during COVID, about what the workplace would look like post-pandemic. And what was so interesting is the way that they really weaved in amenity into that building, into the design. They also weaved in both the retrofit of an existing building and the building of new, so that knitting of those two things together to reduce embodied carbon. And that building, coming out of the pandemic, is one of the largest buildings in London, occupancy of 10,000 people. They had 50% of that building let at practical completion already. So these organisations seeing the real opportunity in terms of this real prime Category A real estate from its sustainability perspective. But not just about sustainability, also about amenity, about that ability to make that building one that would attract people in when we were sort of looking at hybrid working and being a really attractive place for those occupants to come and use that building. So we do get to see some really, really good buildings as part of the BBP. And we don't find it's all in London. So we've been to see the Paradise Birmingham, for example, and we've been up to Manchester to look at the NOMA scheme. We're off to Leeds the week after next with our members. And that sharing of experience is really, really super helpful to our members. The other thing which is really interesting as part of that site visit programme is just looking at the sustainable use of materials. So a number of our members, for example, have been pioneering the use of timber within their construction and within the fit out of those buildings, and some of the lessons that could be learned around looking and working with insurers, with fire risk assessors, etc., to really support that ambitious part of looking at new materials and in a new way. A number of our members also have been reusing materials as well, and looking about some of how you pioneer that from so many different opportunities which that brings in terms of material use, recycling. And also some of our members have been looking at sort of modern forms of construction as well, and some of the opportunities that come with that, not just from a sustainability perspective, but in terms of ease of construction, reduction in health and safety risk, etc. But sort of get back a little bit to your question, around, are we seeing this bifurcation of buildings and there being this differential? Quite interesting. The BBP have a real estate environmental benchmark, and we can look at the data around A to E certification in terms of the EPC. And an increasing number of buildings are getting towards the A and B, but we also do find there is that long tail within the data, and that would reflect where we see within London more generally about the difference of EPC certification, showing in terms of where the theoretical performance of those buildings come. So they were going back again to this opportunity that retrofit provides us to ensure that those buildings get up to speed, and that those occupiers who are demanding and looking for that sustainable space have the opportunity to utilise those spaces. And then the last part, about the really important part of them, once you've got these buildings upgraded, really making sure that they're managed really, really well. And that's where the likes of our managing agent partnership, which Fisher German are a part of, really come into their own as well.
We've been talking about all sorts of aspects that relate to building owners, investors, designers, occupiers, and the word collaboration has been used several times. That's clearly really important, and all of the advisory roles that are wrapped up in that. Have we got any concerns? Are there any risks that we see about skills gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this is a really exciting space to be in. The opportunity is massive. The opportunity to do more, get it right, build a career, whether that's on the advisory side, on the management side. There's so much that can be done, and it's within our gift, that I think it's a really exciting place to be. But you're right, there is a skills gap, there's an education piece, and there's also, more we need to do as people within this area to talk more about it, to make it known so people understand how they can make a difference. Because if we can get everybody on board, it's so much easier to make things move forward. And I know, Jonathan, it's neat that the BBP, the toolkits and the information and the access to people is a great way of opening people up to the opportunities that we have.
Yeah, I mean, the BBP is all about improving professional understanding. And I think one of our great aims is really to make sure that when we're having knowledge shares for our members, that we are really making sure we've got the right people in the room. And I think it's something you do well, Rachel, around actually looking at what's coming up and how can we look at who within the business would most benefit from that particular knowledge share. So if we're having an event on embodied carbon, the right people who are from procurement and other disciplines within the business are attending there and learning from their peers within the industry. But beyond the BBP membership, I think the whole piece around upskilling is a massive industry and national issue of great importance, but of great opportunity as well, because actually, the level of skill and opportunity within the real estate industry is so fantastic. But if we are going to achieve net zero, we do need people with the right skills to be able to deliver that just transition that we are all on this journey towards. An example would be, we've had some knowledge shares about building management systems, these really clever computers that drive the performance of that building. And increasingly, we're seeing the role that artificial intelligence has within there. But also, those systems need to be managed by humans, and those people within have the right skills. And often some of these new technologies can seem actually quite scary and needs a new skill sets within there. So I think there's a great opportunity for the industry to embrace technology and embrace skills at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the application of that knowledge. It's great collecting loads of data on a building or an asset, but if you don't do anything with that data and you don't practically change anything that can then improve it, then it's essentially collecting data for the sake of it. Yeah. And I think it's having the skills to ask the data the right questions to feed out the response that then you can do something with, and you can make practical changes and move things forward, and then feed that in. It's a continuous cycle, isn't it? That needs to then feed into the new design of buildings so that we make sure that we improve or make a difference.
Exactly. I think I'm looking at that topic from the end of design and construction, and I think we're proud, I guess, that the UK are world leaders in terms of R&D and science and innovation, but it's about converting that into implementation within design teams for buildings, within young people and enterprises, and getting young people into a sort of more prosperous future than we might have seen in the last decade. I guess we're 10 years on from Brexit, and obviously we've had the pandemic and some pretty difficult years, but I think we all feel relatively confident that should turn around in the coming 12, 24 months. When that happens, I think we will be sort of acutely aware of this skills shortage. So I think it's the right time to be thinking about how we can plan for that. And that's hand in hand with having a more sort of prosperous economy all round, where we're employing people in these industries to really sort of implement all the fantastic ideas and the steps that have been taken already.
Absolutely.
Rachel, can I take us off in a slightly different direction? We've had mention of some really exciting development schemes. We're sat here in the City of London, but of course in recent years, biodiversity net gain has been something that everybody's had to be very mindful of. As that's a specialist area of yours, would you just like to give us just a feel for some of the challenges and some of the opportunities and the considerations for particularly in the development area?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and if you're building something, then biodiversity net gain is something that's required as part of the planning process, and it's really important that at the outset you understand how that's going to work for whatever your scheme is. Obviously, we're constrained here, and not always B&G can be delivered on site. Sometimes it has to be delivered off site, and sometimes that gives you the best environmental return on investment. We talked about return on investment earlier, and it's not just about finance, it's about how you measure that value. You can put a lot in, but if you don't get a lot out, then is it really worth it? And we've been working with some really impressive clients who are looking at really making that work. So taking land that otherwise wouldn't be productive in another way and creating habitat banks that then enable development to happen within that national character area or local planning authority area. And what that's enabling is that we're using land really thoughtfully. And I think that's something that you already do in your job, Will. You have to look at each site individually and understand how you get the most out of that. And we need to do that more broadly as well. We need to do that across bigger areas. And I think that's something that we're taking really seriously. It's not always the easiest answer, but it's about the right answer that provides the best value back to the environment, but also to the client who's developing something. And we've got some really good schemes that have now developed and on the market, ready to go. And we've got units that are becoming available. And that is essentially leaving our country and areas in a better place. So it's allowing that development to take place, but doing it in a way that creates that net gain. So it's saying, okay, we're going to take this away, but we're going to give back more. And that's a massive transition point, something we've all had to learn over the last couple of years, but it puts us in a really strong place for the future. And there's a lot of opportunity to make that give you really good return on investment.
And Will, presumably this has had a huge impact on your work as well.
Yes, I mean, we talked a bit about Eden Dock, and of course there are very few other projects that we've been involved with where that is effectively a fantastic canvas for creating a habitat for nature to thrive. And it's been great to see that happen. I guess the more typical projects is what you'd call brown to green, where we're looking at large-scale residential-led master plans, a lot of which I think we've probably been involved with somewhere between 20 and 30,000 homes in the sort of East Thames corridor from sort of Canary Wharf eastwards. And I think those sites tend to be, the state that you find them in is not very biodiverse. So I guess in that sense, it's quite easy to demonstrate significant improvement. But what we're seeing across all the projects now is a real need from the whole team, but in particular from very good landscape architects, to really sort of squeeze every drop of potential out of the spaces that are available on any given site. And I think this is all points to us evolving as an industry to work more with nature than against it. And I guess that's a sort of fundamental principle which separates the sort of business as usual sustainable approach of doing a bit less harm to actually doing no harm, or even starting to see that we're sort of repairing the damage that's been done.
Yeah.
And Will, you always think of London as being a very green city. It's renowned for that, and its open spaces. Where do you think it sits on the global index of green cities now?
That's a very interesting question. I haven't got a statistic to give you.
I wasn't expecting one.
But I think London's obviously it's renowned as a leading global city, and I think part of that is down to the heritage and the very dense central city of London. But outside of that, I think it's famous for its parks. It's famous for its the Thames connectivity of the Thames Path is something that's constantly improving and evolving. If you think about how the river used to function, it was a very active trading route and for leisure. A lot of that was lost by development coming forward in the last century or so that didn't prioritise it. And I think what we're seeing more and more of, certainly east of the city, out into Tower Hamlets and Newham and beyond, is using the river for amenity, but also and for active travel, which has got direct sort of health and wellbeing benefits. For the taxi service, which is sort of an underused resource that's really sort of taken off in the last few years. But now also for freight and logistics. So starting to actually use it as a trade route. So that this is blue space rather than green space. But I think the two things are sort of sides of the same coin, if you like. It's getting more bang for our buck in terms of the open space in the capital, and making sure that it's really contributing to reducing emissions, but also public health, well-being, and sort of desirability ultimately for international visitors and investors to see its potential.
Well, I think that's actually a very good, thought-provoking end to our podcast. Thanks for that. I think that just leaves me to give a big, huge thank you to all of you for coming on this edition of Fisher German Talks. Jonathan, and thanks for coming and representing Better Buildings Partnership. Some really great insights from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Excellent. And Will, thanks for coming. Thanks for bringing the Howells insight into the discussion. It's been really interesting.
It's been a huge pleasure. Thanks, Stuart.
And Rachel, thank you, our very own ESG partner, as ever. Thank you very much for being here and by my side.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's great to have ESG at the centre of the conversation. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks again.